Hey, what's up everybody? Hope you've been doing well. So it's been a long time since I've done any content, and who knows where this is going to go, but it's at least a one-off video because something kind of neat has been happening and I found a deck that I wanted to share with everybody. Now the last official proper Magic video that I made was 3 years ago with Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, I think was the last set that I played. So since then a lot of new stuff has released, and I did make that one update video, I don't know, I think it was a little bit more than a year ago now, where I tested out the game, but even then Magic didn't feel all that interesting to me. But two announcements have come out recently that did pique my interest. The first being that Final Fantasy is coming to Universes Beyond, and I'm sure some people don't like that, but actually kind of excited about it. So I've been looking forward to that. I guess that's coming relatively soon, within the next month. 20 days, I suppose, from now. And then the other cool thing that really got me interested in trying out the game again was hearing that Explorer was officially transitioning into Pioneer proper. So I guess they have pretty much everything on Arena now that we want to play with in Pioneer. And so I loaded up the game and I've been trying out the game. So I started last season, right at the kind of tail end of last season, and I did start with Standard just to see how things were going over there, and as you would expect, I'm going to play some pretty typical stuff. I'm going to be playing things like the Mono Red Mice deck, which I had no idea existed, and that was pretty fun, but it doesn't last. You know, once you do the mice thing for a little bit, whatever. And then Dragonstorm came out, and when Dragonstorm came out, the first card that caught my interest very quickly was, of course, Corey Steelcutter, and that card is just absolutely bonkers insane. So I played that quite a bit, and the results were fine. But like with regular Mono Red, it kind of gets old relatively quickly to me. I know it's really fun to be throwing out prowess creatures and then drawing a whole bunch of cards and just going off. And yeah, that's always going to be fun, but I don't want to play that for too much or too long. So then I started looking at Pioneer proper and trying to figure out what decks were over there that I could experiment with. And this is when I ran into a bit of an issue, and I kind of got a little bit down on the game for a brief moment where I kind of wanted to quit the game. Thankfully, I had bought the season pass impulsively, and then I thought, I got to stay in and keep grinding out these 70 levels to get that $15 value out of it. So I was trying Pioneer decks, and I was, of course, looking at MTG Goldfish, as you do, and you look over at the Pioneer metagame and you try to figure out what decks interest you, and you go from there. And I tried a few of them, and the one that I really wanted to make work was the Mono Black mid-range deck. And the Mono Black mid-range deck, the Demon Drain deck, I don't know exactly what you want to call it, but it's, hinging on cards like Unholy Annex and Shieldred, of course, and then it has some demons in it to trigger the Unholy Annex Drain, and Mutavault is pretty fun with that. Whatever, it doesn't matter. What I came to realize was that after being away from the game for 3 years, you have no idea what is going on. There have been so many cards that have released. In fact, I think since Neon Dynasty, looking at this quick list over here on ChatGPT, because that's wonderful, we got 5 sets per year, so I've missed like 13 sets of cards, and I really have no idea. 14 sets with Aether Drift at the bottom there. I don't know what's going on, and when you just net deck a deck like Mono Black, yeah, you know some of the basic workings of it, but you don't really know how to sideboard. You don't know what you're up against. You don't know what to look out for. And I got really down on the deck because I felt like I was winning game 1 quite often, but then games 2 and 3 were just nightmares. And then I tried other decks where I was interested in cards like Innkeeper's Talent, which I just think is a really cool card, but it's just not really strong enough, in my opinion, to make a good run of things. And I kind of lamented to a friend that, hey, I just wish we could go back to 2019, 2018, where I could play Collected Company and be happy with a bunch of 3-drop creatures. So then what I ended up doing was making a collected company deck, and the success that I found with that was a lot better. You can kind of see from my untapped GG stats, like middling success playing that Is a Prowess deck, and then trying the Overlords deck for a little bit in standard. Then I was jumping all over the place, playing this mono black deck here and there, trying to make it work, and just nothing would work for me. But then finally I grabbed my humans deck, I made my own deck, and this is the deck that I want to share with everybody today because, well, it is a pretty sweet deck, and I'm not seeing it very much. When you look over at the stats on Goldfish, and maybe this is not perfectly representative of the entire format, yeah, you have to go quite far down before you see mono white humans. That's a 1% meta share, and then also you want to throw in collected company. I think there is a 5-color human deck over here, collected company deck here. Nobody's playing collected company. That's a tragedy. You gotta be playing collected company because it's such an awesome card. So I threw together a collected company deck with my humans, and boom, it just rocketed all the way up to Mythic without much trouble. The win rate's pretty awesome against some troublesome decks that nobody really likes to play against. So overall, this deck is pretty sweet, and I want to share it with you today. All right, here is the deck, and if you've ever played humans before, a lot of familiar faces in this one. Nothing overly special or unique, but I do have some choices in here that I'm not seeing in any other decks that I think are actually really good choices and make the deck tick. I'm super happy with the way the deck ended up turning out. I did make a few changes mid-season. I think originally I had Fiend Slayer Paladin, I believe is what the card is called, in the deck, because I was seeing a lot of red-based decks early on in my climb, but that card just wasn't really working out. It's a 3 CMC 2/2. It has some cool things on it, but in the end, it's a little bit too weak. So this is what I ended up arriving on, and although I think I could make some changes and maybe splash in some blue to get some Reflector Mage stuff going on, or possibly look into green creatures, I think right now with the mostly mono white with the collected company splashed in shell is what I'm pretty happy with, and I think this is the deck that I will find the most success with currently, at least in the meta the way it is now. Who knows what's going to happen when things change with the next set released. So let's talk about some of the awesome heavy hitters in this deck. We'll start with the 1-drops over here, and a card that probably needs a few more copies in the deck is Hopeful Initiate. This card is just fantastic. It's awesome on turn 1 just as a little mini threat, especially with the ability to do training. It gets a little bit big. It doesn't really go much higher than 3 or 4 power in the best of circumstances, because for the most part, the only card in here that's really going to be triggering it with a higher power level is probably going to be Adeline. Adeline? How do you say her name? The Resplendent Cathar, we'll call her. But you get a few triggers from the training here or there that makes a big difference, but the activated ability is the thing that really sets this thing apart, because right now in the format there are so many artifacts and enchantments that are troublesome, and being able to remove 2+1/+1 counters from any creatures that you control to be able to destroy something is huge. And the card that you really have to watch out for is, of course, Temporary Lockdown, because nearly a third of our deck is 1 and 2 CMC cards. Temporary Lockdown is going to be a blowout against most low-to-the-ground creature-based decks, of course, and it's running around everywhere. So you have to have a way of removing it with the Hopeful Initiate, and boy, oh boy, does this lead to some awesome blowouts if you have this on the field with some counters on creatures. Warden of the Inner Sky is one of the cards that I see pretty much in every humans deck that I did see check out online, and for good reason. This card is fantastic. Being able to utilize your creatures that are either summoning sick or the artifact that is created by another creature that I'll talk about in a second, you're just going to have stuff on the field to be able to tap. 3 artifacts or creatures is not too much of a cost to trigger this card. It gets big very quickly. It's not uncommon to have it as a 4/5 or a 5/6 at the midpoint of the game, and if your opponent can't answer it, which they usually can, but if they can't, this thing is going to win the game on its own. But the key to it is that Scry 1. This yeah, there have been so many games where I flooded out. You know, it's Magic. Of course, you're going to flood out, or you're searching for that last land to be able to hit your collected company. You have to rely on that scry one. And there have been turns where I've decided not to attack just to get a scry off with, you know, losing 1 or 2 points of damage. And that is an awesome trade-off. This card impressed me so much, and I'm very glad that I crafted it. It was the one card that I actually didn't own when I was putting this deck together because it came out during my break. It's awesome. Now, that card, Warden of the Inner Sky, in conjunction with Thraben Inspector, is the beauty of this deck. I love Thraben Inspector, and nobody is playing Thraben Inspector. What are people doing? You gotta play Thrabes. Thrabes is awesome. This comes down with the Warden of the Inner Sky, and you're pumping the Warden right away. You're getting your scries off, you're making a big threat that they have to answer. It is just fantastic. And these clue tokens cannot be discounted. The one cool thing about the clue tokens is that you don't have to tap the clue tokens to be able to sacrifice them. So you are able to still use the Warden of the Inner Sky to pump her up, and then you can, if you have excess mana, still sacrifice that clue token to draw a card. Absolutely huge for stabilizing the game. And in fact, there are so many cards in the format that remove our creatures effectively or with good value, you know, killing something or killing 2-for-1s or 3-for-1s or 4-for-1s. It's insane. You need to be able to keep up with these control decks or these heavy removal based decks, and that's why Thraben Inspector is an all-star, because you have that clue to be able to dig a little bit deeper. And speaking of another card that probably goes under a lot of people's radars that I think is another awesome all-star for that same reason, is the Militia Bugler. It doesn't look like much. It's a 2/3. It does have Vigilance, which also works really well with the Warden of the Sky. You can attack it and then tap it later for a little bit of extra value. But just being able to dig a little bit into your deck to grab a creature with power 2 or less, which is the majority of our cards. The only card that doesn't really work is the Extraction Specialist. And surprisingly, the Resplendent Cathar kind of doesn't work. I thought this card always has a star power, but I wasn't paying very close attention. I believe I had like 3 or 4 creatures on the field. Militia Bugler dug into the deck, and I'm pretty sure Adeline was a card that was among the 4 shown cards, but I couldn't choose her. So I guess her ability is not, or her power is not a static star off the field. It is a dynamic power that is always changing and depending on how many cards that you have on the field. I haven't confirmed that. I'm pretty sure that's the way it worked because I did see it flash up. I was kind of in the moment and I wasn't too worried about noticing mechanics. I just wanted to pick a creature that had 2 power or less and continue on with the game. But I am going to keep an eye out for it because I believe that's how this works. So for the most part, you are going to be able to grab any of your 1 or 2 drops. You're going to be able to grab your Brutal Cathar. You're also going to be able to grab your sideboard cards like Giant Killer, Charming Prince, and Containment Priest. Elite Spellbinder is another one that you're not going to be able to grab, but for the most part, you're hitting with this card. I think I whiffed on it like 1 in 10 times, something like that. And it happens, you know, that's the way this game is. Sometimes you're going to turn up 4 lands, but the Militia Bugler is an awesome card. Then you got your 2 drops. Your 2 drop slots are basically brain dead auto picks, right? Of course, you're going to have the Thalia's Lieutenant. You got to pump up the team. You got to have the Copper Coat Vanguard, provides protection and also a little bit of extra power to your creatures. This card, bonkers, awesome. And then Thalia. Thalia's an all-star, especially right now. Everybody's throwing around spells. If you're going to face up against the Omniscience combos, you're going to go up against Phoenix, of course, the Is It Prowess decks. Whatever, 9 lives. 9 lives, I don't want to talk about 9 lives. So you face the 9 lives, it's annoying. This helps you a little bit in those matchups. So, of course, Thalia is an all-star, and Thalia has to be in the deck. Who wouldn't play with Thalia? Then you have your Brutal Cathars. Brutal Cathars, sure, a lot of creatures from the opponents that need to be taken care of. This is like an unconditional remove any creature, which is just fantastic. You got a Yorion blocker in the way. Now it is a little bit risky because Brutal Cathar, once it disappears, that creature comes back. So you really got to pick your points when you're going to throw it out there. And then when it does flip into the Moonrage Brute, it is not a human anymore, so you're losing some of the protection from cards like the Copper Vanguard, or Thalia's Lieutenant is not going to work with this card as well. So there are some issues with the backside, but if you are taking things with the Brutal Cathar, there's a good chance that you're in a pretty good spot, and it's not a big deal. And it becomes a 3/3 first strike creature with the chance of flipping back to the Brutal Cathar and taking another card. So there are some obvious upsides, and this card is an awesome card. But this is the card that I found myself sideboarding out most of the time for the Elite Spellbinders, because there's so much control in this format. And there is kind of an argument to be made that maybe the Elite Spellbinder should be in the main deck versus and having the Brutal Cathar in the sideboard. But right now, I think I like the Cathar in the main. Who knows? Last main board card to talk about is the Extraction Specialist, just a 2 of. This card's cool. It comes in, most of the time you want to be hitting the Copper Coat Vanguard or the Thalia's Lieutenant for a last minute win, but there have definitely been times when you grab a Warden or you grab a Thraben Inspector just to get a little bit of scrying or extra card draw. This card just really good and flexible, but the downside of this card is everybody's exiling things. The removal nowadays is just exile everything. Nobody destroys anything anymore. So there have been a lot of games when I've removed the Extraction Specialist just because, mono red, a lot of their cards are going to be exiling. I think Torch the Tower is the one that comes to mind right away. Exiles your creature. The Deadly Cover-Up, I think, is another mono black card. It's a big board wipe, but I'm pretty sure it exiles your graveyard after it does the thing. I don't know. There's a whole bunch of things. I just found myself without a graveyard most of the time. Poor Phoenix players are in shambles, I guess. Everybody's exiling, and which is maybe the reason that's happening. Phoenix being so powerful, maybe everybody's just teching to be able to exile so that you don't have to worry about it. So still, this card is pretty cool, but I did find myself taking it out quite often. Now, over in the sideboard, for the most part, I think things are good. Of course, you want your Rest in Peace to be able to deal with the graveyard shenanigans. There's so much. Greasefang, thankfully, is mostly in best of 1, but you do run into it in best of 3 from time to time, and it drives me crazy. But hey, Rest in Peace kind of slows it down. It doesn't really deal with it very well, but it's not that bad. And then Containment Priest, oh my god, Containment Priest, the little 2/2 that could, this card is a little bit of a nombo. You have to be careful with your Collected Company because it doesn't really work well if you have a Containment Priest out on the field. But stopping opponents opposing Collected Companies, because we don't really need the Collected Companies, just kind of sauce on the top. Most of the time, I found myself just building my board without the Collected Company. Containment Priest is awesome for those annoying combo decks. The Indomitable Creativity, I believe is what it's called, bringing out an Atraxa. If an Atraxa hits the field, it's game over. So the Containment Priest out here doing work in those unfair matchups. Charming Prince, a little bit of life gain when you are up against mono red. Mono red is pretty tough for this deck. I found myself losing the majority of my mono red matchups. I just can't handle how aggro they are. And then another all-star, Giant Killer. Oh my god, those big threats come out. Having a Giant Killer in the sideboard to bring in for games 2 and 3 is just awesome. And in addition, its human side, being able to tap a creature also works pretty wickedly. The only card that I'm not really sure about or completely sold on is definitely Brave the Elements here. And this is a card that I brought in just because I thought if I'm going up against mono red or mono green elves or some of these decks that make a big wide board of symmetrical whatever colored creatures, I can pull in the Brave the Elements to be able to swing through that. But it never really worked out, and I think in my remaking of this deck, this is going to be one of those cards that just gets cut. I like the idea of it, but it just doesn't really work out. So that is the deck, and yeah, it's pretty sweet. I cannot believe how well it played. Again, as you can see from the chart, a lot of good matchups. The bad ones, of course, being the mono red, not doing too well, but I didn't see it too often. A lot of control, and this deck actually thrives against control. So if you're looking for something that's a little bit off meta, something that's going to take you up to Mythic, and something that is super fun to play, go ahead and do that. And as a quick last little side note kind of thing, what is going on with on the play and on the draw? This disparity is just depressing, and yeah, I don't know. Will this ever be fixed? Probably not. So that is mono white splashing Coco humans in Pioneer. It's a sweet deck. I hope you try it out. And I don't know if I'm going to make another video, but this is one that I decided to throw together, and I know it's been a little bit rambly, very rambly, but that's what happens when you haven't done anything video-wise for quite some time. Who cares? It's nice to see all of you. I hope to hear from some of you in the comments if you do end up finding this video. And if you don't, hey, what can you do? Take care for now, and maybe see you in the next one. Bye-bye.